Okay, that was abrupt. Um, I'm Chuck Orr, otherwise known as CHM. I've been messing around with computers for 50, 60 years, long time. Most of that time has been in Fort. I probably have the largest resume in fourth of anyone. Today, I would like to say a few words about color fourth and show you some applications. I'm not real great on philosophizing anymore. It used to be we had great dreams of fourth being a religion or a philosophy. I've kind of given up on that. What fourth is a very nice programming language, a very nice way of organizing your thinking, even if you're writing in a different language. I have talked about color fourth before. This is a version of color fourth, which is somewhat different. It still uses color, but it's implemented in a much simpler way. It's implemented in machine language, which I find is a lot simpler than assembly language. It requires you learn some numbers, but that's not hard to do. We all remember our phone numbers. You can remember a couple dozen opcodes as easily as you can the equivalent assembly mnemonics. So give it a try sometime. Meanwhile, I want to share my screen with you, showing you the application which I run most of the time. Bing. Bing. There we go. Bing. Does anybody see anything? Oh, here it is. Huh. Do you see a landscape?
Yep.
It's not what I intended. But that's a 4K screen. And I'm really pleased to have such high resolution available. And it's really cheap to do. You just buy a TCL 55-inch monitor. Come on. What's going on? This one. Oh, here it is. Zoom probably gets great marks for being easy to use. And I have to take exception. Oh, I see what I did wrong. Okay. Somehow in the course of that fumbling, color fourth went away. I call this UHD fourth. It's fourth specifically for a UHD monitor. which is not to everyone's taste. It isn't extremely portable. But here's an example of some of the ColorForth code. Blue is a comment. Red is defining a new word. Green is the definition of the word. And white are immediate words. In this case, a semicolon. What I want to do is type in the command line at the top of the screen, clock. Without the caps. There is my clock. It is 12:39 in Nevada, which is 2039 UTC on November 21st, 2020. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
And at 1500, I'm going to start my daily fast. I eat for 6 hours a day and I fast for 18 hours a day. That works very well for me. I recommend it. The time is also 12:56 solar. That tells me where the sun is. It's 56 minutes beyond noon. It changes nicely during the year. What I've done here is program a bunch of different clock type numbers, which otherwise I would have to wonder about or do a Google search on. And here all the things I care about are presented to me. It is 1648 sidereal, which means that the celestial longitude of 1648 is due south of me at the moment. That's the Scorpius constellation. This is one way I'm trying to learn the constellations on the ecliptic. In 1951 sidereal, well, 1951 is the longitude of Altair. And when the sidereal time ticks around to that, it will be due south. And I can identify it if I don't already know, providing it's nighttime. On the right-hand side of the screen are things that aren't hours, but are days. It's Saturday, the 326th day of the year, which is 59,174 modified Julian day. It's 30 days until the solstice, which will be near Christmas. It's 42 days till perihelion, which will be the coldest in the Northern Hemisphere. It's 6 days till new moon. It's been 6 days since new moon, or roughly 8 days until the full moon. It's 113 days till daylight savings time, which is reassuringly far away. I'm 82 years and 74 days old, and I will be 91 in 3,214 days. These are numbers which keep occurring to me, and I keep wondering about, and now I don't have to wonder anymore. I have to look them up. It takes a fair amount of code to calculate all of these things, and I'm gradually adding. In the upper left, where fast is what I call events. And there are very varying events during the day which appear there. The next event which I should care about, sunrise, sunset, end of fast, things like that. At the very bottom are some numbers I have a hard time remembering: my latitude, longitude, and elevation. So here, this is my private screen telling me sort of everything I need to know. Another interesting screen is called Words. These are in the format of haiku, 3 lines of text, which I find interesting and thought-provoking. All the same in 100 years. That is a quote from one of Neville Shute's stories. It sort of tries to tell you that no point in worrying about things now, they're going to go away. Like the pandemic. Pandemic is a big flap. It's been going on for what, 6-9 months? All the same in 100 years. Now what I have is, 70 or so text strings like this, which I cycle through at random. Each one lasts about a minute and will help me time this talk if I look through maybe 10 of them. The lights in the sky are stars. That's the title of a science fiction
It's rained once.
novel. And you notice that the characters were spelled out one at a time. I did that just for the dramatic effect. It didn't cost much. It will also lead me to a better character drawer. If you notice, if you have a 4K screen, you can see the curves are a bit jaggedy because I had to magnify the character set more than I would like. What I'm going to do in the future is actually draw the characters from a description. This is the best character set I've ever devised. It's the smallest. If you compare the G to an O, or I guess on the screen there's an E, you'll see that they're both based upon the character O with a little bit of editing. Here's a good one. I am the captain of my soul. That's from a poem, Invictus, which meditates on the difficulties you can encounter in life and how you should overcome them. I am the captain of my soul has something to say about free will. Am I really the captain of my soul, or am I the victim of fate? Now, I have been thinking about this recently and conclude that indeed free will exists. The universe is not deterministic. Quantum mechanics is not required. And I am the captain of my soul. The advantage of these little text strings is that it gets me thinking in directions which I had not. And of an evening, I can easily spend an hour ruminating on the various permutations of small text strings. Homeward Bound is one of my favorites. I do a lot of hiking. I have learned to hike 4 miles in and 4 miles out this year. This is something I could not do last year. And when I get 4 miles out, I turn around. I'm beginning to get tired, and it's reassuring to think that I'm homeward bound. The reason I can do more this year than I could last year is because I'm taking iodine supplement. I'm taking a huge megadose of iodine. 250 times the recommended amount. And it is a very good thing. I recommend it. Your body is poisoned with bromine, and iodine will help flush that out. One more. This is from the song Don't Fence Me In. And it strikes my fancy because I am on a ridge where the West commences. And the fact that you could use a word like commences in a popular song is interesting. I'm looking to the west at the moment. There's a huge ridge to the west of me, and that's not where the West commences. The West commences on a ridge to the east of me. But again, it's a very pleasant thought to deal with. Now we'll look at some code. Put a number on the stack, type editor, and it will show me that block of code. After I type a space, you mustn't type a carriage return because that erases everything. And you've got to spell it right. There is the code which generates a picture of the GA144. That's not what I intended to show you. Color Forth doesn't waste any time error checking. What happens is that if you do something terribly wrong, you will crash and you can reboot, and that's okay. But here's the word run. It pops three things off of the hardware stack, sets up a begin again loop, and calls input to get a character, an input from the keyboard, and then keys to interpret that input. The definition of keys has some hex instructions. And a hardware loop, two hardware loops, for if then and for if then. For if is a zero test. If the key is a return from the time rig loop, I call pick. If the key is an escape, a tab, I call forth one. So this is the kind of code I'm now writing. Mostly it's one line of code per word, sometimes more. I needed the word /mod, which I had not defined before. And so there's a definition of /word. Let me look at some of the source code. Here are some of the 3 lines of text, which I'm randomly accessing. Fourth, September 68 is interesting because it says Fourth is 52 years old. And the date is typical of historical dates. It's a reconstruction. It may be true, may not be true, doesn't really matter. Fourth is defined as having been invented September 1968. I think that's enough. If I type this pretty obscure button here, which I can't even read, it goes back to Zoom. And I would be happy to answer any questions that people might have or pontificate on any subject that people might request, and leave it at that. Thank you.
Hey, Chuck, it's Don Golding.
Hey, Don.
I'm going to be going down a venture of trying to build artificial intelligence on Forth. You have any suggestions? Or ideas, you know, maybe paths to take? Has there been any? I know that Forth, like Lisp has been written in Forth, Smalltalk. You know, I wrote a neural network language in Forth once. Is there a particular something you've been thinking about? A pathway to intelligence from, you know, from where Forth is that you've been thinking about over the years?
I very much want to write intelligent programs, but they're not going to be termed artificial intelligence. I think Forth is almost the antithesis of artificial intelligence. The neural nets that people are using are unfathomable. They just work. On the other hand, it may be possible to devise a neural net that explains itself, which would be nice. Forth is a language for programming a well-defined problem. It can do it much cheaper than any kind of artificial intelligence. But it does require the imagination, creativity, and effort of a programmer. And I guess I'm just too old to appreciate the new algorithms coming in. I'll stick with Forth.
I've always looked at Forth as a meta language. It's a language to build new languages. That's why I've always looked at it.
True.
So, yeah. And, you know, when I learned how to use Crate Does, it was like, wow.
I think Forth would be an excellent language to program a neural net in. But I don't have access to a neural net.
It just works.
In fact, neural nets, especially the kind that are on silicon, as far as I can tell, are undocumented and unavailable.
Well, you know what I did with my neural network language? I took a neural network AI course back in the 90s, and we had to have a project. And I asked the instructor, I want to write a neural network language in Forth. He goes, what's Forth? And I told him, he says, sure. So what was interesting so I used Crate Does. And when you create a neuron, it creates a variable inside the neuron that is a pointer where you put the CFA that updates the neural net. So instead of having this uniform, like a backprop neural net, this uniform update of all the neurons, you could assign clusters of neurons to have different update procedures. The other thing I did was you could have asymmetrical neurons. You could have clusters of them, and then I had a word for linking the inputs and the outputs. So individually, because each neuron would be named after, because it's a create does thing. Each neuron that you create, you tell it how many inputs and the output, and then I had a word called link, and so it would take the address, because create returns the address of the neuron, and it would link neurons together. So you could make, just any sort of structure that you wanted.
Sure, sounds good.
I never wrote anything in it though. I just created the language.
I have a question. Once upon a time, I put forth on a Cray computer, one of the early Cray supercomputers. Actually, it wasn't on the computer. It was on one of the terminals that controlled the computer. Has anyone put forth on a modern supercomputer?
Well, I know there's a lot of us putting forth inside FPGAs. That's very popular right now.
Yeah, but that's not a petaflop computer.
Yeah, that's true.
Please define an FPGA.
Field programmable gate array. So it's a piece of silicon that basically there's millions of logic gates on it and RAM, and they're not connected. And then you use VHDL or System Verilog is really the better one to use. And then it creates circuitry, but it creates parallel computers. You could have hundreds of parallel processes operating at the same time.
Okay, I'll read more on it.
Someone might explore some option for getting onto a Los Alamos or a Department of Defense or an IBM supercomputer. I apologize for my picture. It's the sun is shining. I don't have any curtains. I can't really move the setup, so I'm stuck.
Can you hear me?
Ah,
I've started to think of Forth also as it would be a good tool to create new virtual machines. Like I think Forth would be a good tool to implement the JVM, the Java virtual machine, or the C#.NET, the CIL, the language that underlies it. I think that Forth should be able to do those things easily. Does anybody, what do you think of that, about that?
Yes, I quite agree. Forth, in a sense, designs a new language for every application. You pick your syntax, you pick your vocabulary, and Forth implements it for you. And I think more easily than any other language.
Okay, are we ready to move on?
One question. Don, can you share an email to interchange about the idea of neural networks that you're working on?
On the what?
Don. I was asking Don Golding.
Oh, Yeah, I lost that code, but I do want to resurrect it over the next year or so. I'll put my email in the chat.
Ah, perfect. Thank you. Appreciate it.
So any more questions for Chuck?
Mr. Moore, it's Peter from Brazil. I have a question for you.
Okay,
Do you hear me?
yes?
We've been talking with friends in our group about the beginnings of your work with the B50,000 from Burroughs. And you said, or somebody, or I read this on the internet about the origin of the swap, drop, rot words. Can you tell us a bit more about that? Because it's really interesting, at least for me.
You're right. It comes from the 5500. It was their mnemonics for the opcodes. I was working off the 5500 at Mohasco the same time I was inventing Forth. So I just sort of picked those words and ported them. Swap is fairly obvious. Dupe is an abbreviation for duplicate. Not very profound. Drop is pretty obvious. If you think of a stack of plates and you drop one, it works. Over is not got any particular meaning. It just means move something over something else. So those words don't have to be named that. The concepts are important, but if someone wants to come up with a different spelling of that word, fine with me.
And I have another question. I heard in the past you experimented with voice for force or voice over force. Can you tell us also a bit more about that? Speech recognition with force. That is better said.
That never went anywhere. The thought of speaking to a computer raises terrible issues of privacy. You couldn't sit in an airport waiting room and talk to your computer. That just wouldn't work. Typing in a computer is much more precise and much quieter. So I've abandoned that line of thought.
Mr. Moore, do you think it could be maybe used for, like, voice could be used for commenting out the code maybe?
The advantage of voice is you have a human being you're talking to. And the overhead required to do a good job of voice recognition is neural nets. It's huge. I have not come up with any beautiful way of listening to sound and turning it into text.
Thank you. And I had a second question. It's an honor to talking to you, actually. I was thinking, why do you think Ford has failed to go mainstream? Do you think it's because maybe people are thinking too complex, or what do you think could be, like, can we resurrect Ford as a programming language again, and what do you think are the steps necessary to do that?
I used to think about that a great deal. And I think the resolution is that what happens in the world is largely a matter of luck. Unpredictable, unrelated to quality or cost, or it's just a fad. And some fads stick and some fads don't. I don't think there's any need for Forth to become a mainstream language. I think it's a very excellent niche language and personal language, and can be used to advantage by people like us without requiring that the whole world give us permission.
Thank you. Thank you.
As a researcher, as a language researcher, have been I appreciate what Sean said about searching for the Holy Grail. I often explained it that way myself. I think that as a discipline, software engineering and software development, I think that we need to embrace some of the minimalism, the Spartan, I'll even call it Zen, and of what Forth has been, and what your what your journey, your exploration, your whole life in a way has been an exploration or an exercise of trying to find the optimal language. And but if I would rename your Forths, Mr. Moore, I would rename them Zen Forth 1, Zen Forth 2, because that one thing I got out of Dr. Ting's book is that when you take to add to knowledge, add every day, but to add wisdom, subtract every day. And I think you've added wisdom nonstop to your language throughout the years. That's why I hope you also give us what you're doing today. Thank you.
I of course agree with you completely. And I think that ColorForth, my latest iteration of ColorForth, without an assembler, is in that exact tradition. It is simpler, cleaner, less syntax, all these good things. Maybe someday I will get around to documenting it.
Please.
All right. On that note, I'd like to thank Chuck for the fireside chat. Any closing thoughts, Chuck?
Nope. Everybody stay safe.
We'll hope to see you next year, or even before that. You're more than welcome at this table anytime.